Growing Up Weird.
Hi, and welcome to Growing Up Weird, the podcast where we explore how the earliest chapters of Western childhoods shape the health stories that we then carry into our adulthoods. I'm Dr. Greg Dickens, scientist and consultant in medical innovation, and I am here with Dr. Gwen Bradbury.
Hello!
Who is a healthcare researcher, author, and your guide through the science, stories, and traditional strategies that connect childhood beginnings to lifelong good health. Each week, we dig into the newest evidence, understand how it links together, and walk through some of the changes that we in the West could make to give kids decades of better health. So, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a healthcare professional, or simply curious about how the body and brain develop over time, you're in the right place. Are you ready? Have you got a cup of tea? Good. We begin, as ever, with the news. So, Gwen, do you have news this week?
I do.
How much news have you got this week?
I have one paper.
I have two news.
Oh, okay.
News being, I assume, the plural of new?
Yeah, I have one new.
You have one new, I have two news. Therefore, in an ABA pattern, may I go first?
Go for it.
Thank you. The first I can't even stick to my own rule. The first one is an interesting little one out of the University of Wollongong, which I love as a name. And it is a very simple screen time horror story. We've read thousands of screen time papers, people saying, apparently if you let your child do nothing other than screen time forever, it's bad for them slightly.
I've heard that too.
You've heard that once or twice. This one is another one just to make people go, huh. The group led by Marcelo Toledo Vergas at the University of Wollongong, which was published last month, says actually that you shouldn't be worrying about your kids' screen time for their development. You should be worrying about your screen time for their development.
Ooh.
They looked at 22 studies in 10 countries with 14,900 participants.
Okay, reasonable size.
Size. And looked at positive and negative outcomes for two types of parental screen time distractions.
Okay.
One was the passive, where the parent could be distracted at any point. They were just scrolling to pass the time. Mm-hmm. And one was the interactive, where the parent actually had to get something done, writing emails or something. Mm-hmm. And they looked at, is there a difference in outcome to the kid? And, is there any outcome to the kid if the parent is distracted by their phone?
Okay.
Really simple. Mm-hmm. Turns out, cognitive problems, which, very slight. Don't give me that look. Very slight.
Okay.
But what I thought was really interesting, obviously, the more you interact with a child, the more opportunities they have to learn. Fine. We could have seen that one coming. What I found really interesting was that there is no difference between being available on demand. So, you're distracted, but you'll look up as soon as they say your name. Or being distracted and being like, I'm really sorry, I have to get this done.
Huh.
There is no difference.
Oh, I guess I'd have assumed, naively, that if your child talked and you looked up, it would be better than if you did not.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought so. Anyway, just yet another horror story about phones and parenting. I am pretty guilty of this myself, and it will encourage me to forget my phone upstairs more often.
Fair.
Anyway, that's my first piece of news. It's very predictable. I just like there were 15,000 people involved.
Yeah, impressive. Huh.
What's yours?
I'm nothing about screen time. I'm talking sugar today again because there was a big systematic review and meta-analysis. So a study looking at other studies of people who eat sugar in different forms and their risk of type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. This came from Delacorte et al. And was published in the journal Advances in Nutrition. It's a journal that backs itself.
Yeah,
I guess
right.
not steps back in nutrition or anything else
It's
like
not
that.
just nutrition. We're making it better. Okay.
But so the conclusion of the study was the results do not support the common assumption that dietary sugar, irrespective of type and amount, is consistently associated with increased type 2 diabetes risk.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. There are quite a few kind of weasel words here that soften it, so it's not not the most definite conclusion. But quite, I would say, fairly unsurprisingly, I think the evidence has been pointing in this direction, which you'd expect to be highlighted by a meta-analysis.
Sure.
drinking sugar is much worse for you than eating sugar. So sugar sweetened beverages, as we know, are really bad for you.
Yeah.
Fruit juice is also moderately increases your risk of type 2 diabetes. And again, I feel like this is a bit more accepted. I didn't think this was particularly surprising.
No.
But those are the two that are associated with increased risk. And then they were reviewed a whole mishmash of studies and had fairly low certainty that some types of sugar consumption at fairly low doses were protective against type 2 diabetes, which is unsurprising because typically those were consumption of like total sugar.
Whole fruit?
Yeah, so I think there is a whole fruit piece. They speculated that maybe sugar in foods that otherwise people wouldn't eat might be a contributor. It was a little bit like, it's a good thing that there was sugar in yogurt because people might eat yogurt, and I was a little bit suspicious. I had to look through the conflicts of interest, and there were a lot of conflicts of interest, but none that I thought were particularly likely to make them claim one way or another. But I think the major conclusion was that drinking sugar is much worse than eating sugar. And we've talked about this before, although I'm not sure on the podcast, but having sugar that very quickly hits your bloodstream because it's very easy to digest.
Because, to be clear, it's already in solution.
It's already in solution, and they're really small, so you don't need to do a lot of enzymatic processing. And because when you drink liquids, they get into your small intestine much faster than your stomach.
Down the phenomenally named Magenstrasse.
I love the Magenstrasse. For people who are listening, this is a super cool bit of physiology that we for a long time thought is completely irrelevant. And now we're like, it has some actually quite, important relevance, especially when it comes to drinking sugar rather than eating sugar, because it is a mechanism that if you drink a liquid, even if your stomach is full, for some types of liquid, your stomach kind of goes, oop, and widens a little bit. I'm doing a gesture here.
Yeah, she's doing a gesture here. It doesn't fit down the microphone very well.
Where your stomach kind of opens a little bit wider when you've got a full stomach. So the liquid can kind of go round the great big lump of food in your stomach and into your small intestine. And that's also a really bad idea if you are drinking sugar, because it means that the sugar gets very quickly into your small intestine within kind of 5 to 10 minutes after drinking it, and that means that it very rapidly goes into your liver and it overwhelms your liver's normal methods of diverting those nutrients down the right metabolic pathways.
Yeah. The phrase drinking sugar has been said now 4 times, and every time you've said it, I have just for a second forgotten you're talking about a verb and then a noun, and thought that you were talking about a compound noun, like there's drinking cocoa. And I was like, is this some... Oh, no, she's just talking about drinking...
I'm talking
sugar.
about sugar-sweetened beverages and fruit juice, really.
I just thought it was a weird, horrible drink I'd never heard of.
But I think it's interesting, because I think the more we learn about the context in which we eat sugar and how our body expects to encounter sugar, we realise that there are loads of nuances. We typically, are quite straightforward, where we're like, we know... we can just talk about this because this is an easy way to set up children. But yes, there are nuances depending on how you eat the sugar, what the sugar is in, and all of these other pieces. So I just am raising that in this study here.
I like that. I like that a lot. And should I ever, lose all of my morals, I will start a company selling drinking sugar. Okay. My second piece of news. Mm-hmm. I'm using the plural there because it is, in fact, a Father's Day review.
Hey.
We are recording this on Father's Day, and if you haven't noticed, I'm a father, and that gives me permission to do a Father's Day review.
Happy Father's Day, Greg.
Well, thank you very much. Very kind. I noticed a little piece of clickbait, or rather, it noticed itself upon me, that was talking about the importance of fathers to kids as they're growing up. And I thought, I wonder if any of this is about the adults those kids grow up to be, and if it is, it'll be relevant for growing up with. So there were 3 things that I thought were quite interesting for the long-term health of kids that are the effects of fathers. Mm-hmm. One is eating. So childhood diet is very dependent on father's diet, which I thought was really interesting.
So cool.
There's a paper out of the University of Dublin by Stephanie Rohill et al, that's the one, which was out in 2019, which looked at which looked at kids' diets and looked at parents' diets. And if there's no father in the home, the diet is very much the mother's diet.
Okay.
If the father is still there, kids' diet much more closely follows father's diet.
Father's diet. Fascinating.
Which I thought was really, really interesting.
I remember seeing a study about picky eating in kids, and like if your mother's a picky eater, you've got like a 5 times higher risk, and if your father's a picky eater, you've got, I don't know,
6
8 times,
yeah.
And then if both of them, it's like 26 times higher risk. But that's fascinating. It follows fathers. Okay.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's cool.
So I thought that was quite cool. There's the reason, obviously, for those listening who want me to complete my logical train of thought, the reason this is a long-term thing is that your diet in childhood is very strongly indicative of your diet in adulthood. The things you try during your window of I'm going to try stuff are then the things that you build your adulthood diet on. And if you get enough vitamins, minerals, macronutrients, micronutrients, and crunchy frippery, then you're going to be fine. And if you don't, you're going to struggle. Childhood diet is important. Okay, next up in my fatherhood review is goal-setting behaviour.
Okay.
Apparently, according to a paper by... Oh, I'm going to murder this name. I apologise in advance to Professor Natasya Lazovicha at State University of Novi Pazar in Russia. I apologise. I'm sorry. I kind of hope you're not listening. Anyway... she looked at, her and her group looked at behavioural determinants that are passed on from the fathers to children, and the big one that kids get from their fathers or fatherhood influence, whether it's actually a father or a male carer, is goal-setting behaviour and goal-following behaviour. And that obviously is very useful in academic success, and they found that one of the major things that happens if you remove fatherhood influence from the home, even if you've still got a perfectly sound base of care, two mothers or multiple female carers or whatever, you still don't do as well at school because there is not so much goal setting and goal following behaviour.
Fascinating.
Which I thought was interesting, and obviously to do the same thing again. Childhood school attainment leads on in a big way to the rest of your life. Obviously there's career and stuff, but amount of stress you are under influences your immune system, etc., and that stress can be driven by struggling at school.
Fascinating. Okay. Diet, goal-setting behaviours.
Finally, is one we've spoken about before in person. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast because apparently 13 episodes is too much for my brain.
Yeah, in comparison to how many years have we been together, Greg?
Yeah, indeed.
Quite a few.
Talking of which, relationships and the templating of what you will find acceptable and desirable in a relationship. If you are a male child, or at least a boy, what you want and what you will accept and what you will give to future relationships is very much determined by watching your father. That was it's been known / assumed for a long time, but a really good review in 2019 by Go Woon-sa at the National Youth Policy Institute in South Korea and William Fabricius out of Arizona State in the US. Brilliant review by those two, looking at where people fell down in adult relationships and how that might be linked to what they had seen and templated on as children.
So let me just get this straight. You're saying that male children follow how their fathers behaved when they take that forward in relationships with either men or women?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm also saying that if the fathers put in the effort to show why they are doing certain things in relationships, if they explain what's going on, those kids then have an easier time with relationships in the future.
Interesting, because I've certainly heard it said that as a woman, how you see your father behaving dictates what you look for in a relationship in the future.
Found a good paper on that as well.
Yeah, but I hadn't seen it the other way around, how men model relationships to their male sons.
Yep.
Obviously, sons are male by definition. I know, pulling a face.
Are we getting into the?
Oh no!
Are we getting into the sex versus gender thing?
Because
I'll go down that kind of worms.
We can go with male sons if that's the right thing to say.
Okay, so that's my fatherhood review for Father's Day. Your your father makes a big difference to what you end up eating as a child and therefore an adult, your goal-setting behaviour and therefore your academic attainment and likelihood of stress, etc. as an adult, and your quality and longevity of your relationships as an adult.
Fascinating.
Happy Father's Day to me. So, with the news done, let's talk about your article. What is the major thrust of your article this week?
The thrust of the article this week, Greg, is that in weird cultures...
Is that weird, Western, educated, industrialised, rich and democratic?
Very good.
Got it the right
In
order.
weird cultures, many babies end up with unusually shaped heads because of abnormal mechanical loading in early life.
Interesting. Okay. What do you mean by weird shaped heads?
I mean heads that are an unusual shape at the back. Either that they're kind of flattened right in the middle at the back, that's called brachycephaly, or they're flattened on one side or the other at the back, so you've got a kind of dent. Or if you look from above, apparently in severe cases, the baby's head looks more like a kind of parallelogram or a diamond than a sphere, because you push slightly on one side of the head and then the skull kind of misshapes in that direction.
So when you say back of the head, what you mean is back of the head and its effects on the rest of the skull?
Yeah, that's true. So the kind of bit that gets pushed in is the bit behind the ears.
Okay.
But because if you have, in effect, a ball and you put a dent in it in one place, often the rest of the ball has to accommodate the stuff that should be inside it.
Okay, I'm kind of glad that the brain doesn't just compress. But,
Yes, that is true.
But that sounds pretty horrible. What are the effects of that?
Well, so the main problem is that you've got a whole load of structures inside the head that are filled with liquid or that are filled with air and that expect to be in the right position relative to each other. So actually changing by kind of pushing in part of the head can change how those structures interact. So that might look like differences in how your ear canals work and increased risk of ear infection. Mm-hmm. It might mean differences in how your jaw meets and changes in increased risk of crooked teeth and asymmetries across your jaw.
And I assume all of the downstream effects of that, chewing problems, leading to breathing problems and all that stuff we've talked about before.
Yeah, and changes in the shape of your eye sockets and risk of astigmatism, so how your eyeball is compressed. So there are a host of things that are associated with a change in shape of the head. But actually the relative risk of these is generally fairly low because it's a great big spectrum. So you have a lot of kids who have some degree of being affected and then you have some kids who are quite severely affected.
Okay.
But I think the big thing that really happens is that you change how a person looks. And that also is very important to that person. So it changes because it changes the symmetry of the face. Even in young children, it can affect how parents and other, not so much parents, but unfamiliar adults interact with them. Because, rather painfully, the child looks less cute. And as they become an adult...
That is harsh.
It is harsh, isn't it? I mean, we know this. We said in the article, we've got a child that is profoundly asymmetric.
We do have a wonky kid.
It is, and that is it's a hard thing to say. But actually, yes, it affects how cute the baby looks. And actually, in adulthood, I see children in my children's school classes who I remember had quite severe head-shaped differences as babies, and now as older children, it's often quite, you wouldn't really notice it, but there are certain hairstyles that are really important, otherwise you really would notice it. So it changes how that person is going to manage their appearance throughout their life.
And I guess even if your head shape returned entirely to normal at the age of 3, mm-hmm. you've had a history of slightly odd interactions with unfamiliar adults for 3 years, and that's going to set you up for a distrust of unfamiliar adults, or at least a 1% difference in your trust of adults. That is interesting. I've not really thought about that.
Hopefully, rates of this abnormality are around 50% at the moment, which is really quite eye-opening. So a lot of babies look a little bit, unusual. And as we know, I look back on photos of my baby and I think, oh my goodness, I loved you, but you're a weird looking infant. So potentially, because it's so common, maybe it has less effect. I think that's a comforting thing to think. But even so, we should be, when we see an indicator like this on so many babies, and the other thing I haven't mentioned, this incidence, so the frequency of this problem has gone up so much that actually things have changed a lot. Baby skulls aren't supposed to be doing this. So we should be thinking about our own culture and saying, why is it that we have this very, very common problem?
Well, I mean, you say baby skulls aren't meant to be doing this. If there are 9 billion people on the planet and half of our babies have got wonky heads, maybe their skulls are meant to be doing this.
But it depends where you look. So 50%, the 50% figure is in weird cultures. It's not a common thing across other cultures.
Interesting. Okay. Well, then what's going on? What is causing this in weird cultures and protecting people from it in other cultures?
So the incidence of having a flattened head, so how common it is, has gone up enormously since there was a very specific change in the advice that parents were given.
I remember you mentioned in the article 1992 and the anti-SIDS. Wow, there was a great name for it. What was
Back
it?
to Sleep.
Back to Sleep.
Back to Sleep campaign. So in again, much more commonly in weird cultures, there was increasing recognition that some babies died during sleep. And that's obviously horrific. I can't even begin to imagine it. Absolutely devastating. Now, this is more common because of certain cultural behaviours, and it's more common in certain ethnic groups. So actually much more common in the UK in white parents than it is in Southeast Asian and Bangladeshi parents. So there are very big cultural variations even within a country. But what it meant was that there was increasing understanding that this awful thing happened to babies, and there were certain things that parents did that increased the risk of this happening. And one of the ways that they tried to reduce the risk was to get parents to put babies to sleep on their back. And that seems to be, interestingly, because being put on their back is actually a little bit stressful, so they sleep less deeply. So it's a way of actually having a baby that is sleeping slightly less well, and so is more likely to rouse if there is a problem.
That's okay. You're less far under. You're more likely to do something or be awake enough to do something if things go wrong.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
So you could just play like thrash metal or something.
Yeah, well, presumably, but that wasn't one of the interventions.
They didn't
that
test
they
that?
Tested, no. So yes, so their parents were told to put babies on their backs. The Back to Sleep campaign was a Western solution to a Western cultural problem, which is that we historically have had babies sleeping in quite unusual ways from an evolutionary perspective. And I say historically in the last 100, maybe 200 years. And that's because there's been a lot of focus on getting children to sleep independently. There's been a lot of cultural undermining of breastfeeding. The kind of normal system by which a baby sleeps with their mother, breastfeeds it with their mother, is very, very close to their mother, has been disrupted, and one of the consequences of that is a baby whose sleep is abnormal and a mother who's not able to respond in the way that she's been programmed to do.
That's gonna make a lot of people very uncomfortable, which I think is not unreasonable. But this idea that we brought SIDS upon ourselves by not being there for infants is heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I think, again, not being there sounds incredibly like a personal attack.
Well, let me rephrase it
Yeah.
then, because what I meant was literally being slightly too far out of range, not being there, and by there I mean within 6 inches.
Yeah, and also there's the other piece I've seen it described as kind of learning to be aware. When you allow the normal systems to develop between a mother and a baby, you have this kind of co-regulation of each other's responses.
Yep.
And when you get in the way of that in many ways, so when you get in the way of that by, culturally interfering with breastfeeding, by, mandating different ways of sleeping, etc. You disconnect those systems. And so through no fault of the mother, she is not as kind of entrenched within her baby's rhythms, and the baby is not as much within hers.
Sure, she just doesn't have as much data.
Exactly.
And she can't respond with as much data in response.
Yeah.
The idea of bringing back proximity being a medicalised thing, I mean, you've heard of kangaroo care.
Yeah, it's true.
This return to normal mother-baby proximity as an NHS prescribed behaviour, I find fascinating. Worrying, but fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it's so difficult because any conversation you have around here, as you've highlighted, runs the risk of making people feel very upset, feel personally attacked, and it's not at all intended to be that. I was actually talking to a friend whose sister has just had a baby in the last couple of weeks, and my friend said that her sister had the kind of pre-birth education lessons and was told absolutely that on no account she should ever co-sleep with her baby. She should never fall asleep with her baby because she was putting her baby at risk of SIDS. And she was so desperate not to fall asleep with the baby, she wouldn't take the baby into her bed. So she fell asleep with the baby while the baby was breastfeeding on a chair. And then when she woke up, she just immediately burst into tears, like, how could I have been such an awful mother to have fallen asleep in this situation and put my baby at risk? Jeez. And you think, oh my goodness, you poor thing, that is so many levels of wrong that you're trying to deal with. That's so culturally abnormal.
Which brings us back to Happy Father's Day, because dads are encouraged to fall asleep with babies all the time because we're not breastfeeding. We're completely allowed to fall asleep with a baby. It's cute. It's adorable.
Oh, yeah.
It is, though, right?
Yeah,
who was it
true.
taking photos of me and the baby asleep when we first had one?
Yeah, fine. Yeah. It's very cute.
But it's just so frustrating. Anyway, I'm sorry. So this is a Western thing brought about by a Western intervention to a Western problem. In the rest of the world, what happens instead? In
the rest of the world, so there is no culture other than our culture which separates infants and mothers during sleep. That is, it's hard to explain just how abnormal a thing this is. But normally what you have is you have a mother who breastfeeds, who has her baby sleeping next to her. The baby has a breastfeeding baby. They have a completely different pattern of sleep. So they have more active muscle tone. They rouse more, and not necessarily with complete waking, but they feed in their sleep. The mother interacts with them in the sleep. So it's actually this kind of very complex system overnight.
And how does that complex system, you're talking a lot about feeding, how does that make a difference to head shape?
Because it means that the baby is shifting position a lot and moving more.
Okay, we're not just sagging down onto one point.
We don't have a baby who is really full, who is put on their back, and sometimes even actually, kind of wedged so they cannot move off their back.
Into a baby-shaped hole.
Into a baby-shaped hole. And so often breastfeeding babies sleep on their side. So if you the studies that have looked at how breastfeeding babies sleep in a co-sleeping system, breastfeeding babies very usually sleep on their side. So that also changes the loads. And mothers have two breasts, so you have to shift position in order to access those different breasts. Okay,
so we're talking about multiple positions. That means, I assume, multiple points of pressure, in effect, multiple dents all over the head, leading to... Well, like trying to make a ball out of blue tack, right? You press it in 1,000 different directions and you get a ball.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's passive pressure. In your article, you talked a lot about active tension as well. I think that brings us back to breastfeeding. What's going on there?
So it's not just about how much the baby's head is squashed in a certain position passively. It's also about how much the baby can move their head and, in effect, distribute the pressure themselves over their whole head.
Okay.
And so that comes from a baby that has the neck strength and the body strength to be able to control their head. One of the things about the culture that we live in is that neck strength is really not very valued. We spend a lot of time trying to protect babies' necks, which has the effect of preventing them strengthening them. So actually one of the things that we noticed...
Sorry, I'm grinning away here. You can't see it through the microphone, but this whole... I'm sorry to interrupt. No, this whole we spend so long protecting that we forget to strengthen is just the biggest theme that comes up again and again and again on this podcast. That in overprotecting we understrengthen.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when we were traveling and we were living in all these different places, you'd see really young babies and they'd follow you with their eyes because their head was moving.
Yeah.
And
that was kind of creepy, actually.
Yeah. They look so much more awake and alert because they've got the ability to interact with their environment by taking control of it with their movement.
Yeah.
And when you lose that, when you have a baby that we've in effect deprived of the ability to get strong, then even if they are uncomfortable, because their head's always pushed in a certain direction, they don't have the ability to change their situation. And so that's why it's so important to have the muscle strength and the muscle strength to be able to control the head. And then the other piece of that is that you need to have the bony strength to be able to withstand the loads. And that comes from time outside, vitamin D, being able to strengthen your skull as well.
No noggin rickets.
Noggin rickets, yeah. That's why vitamin D, like supplementation, is, a very Western and very effective way to reduce the risk of having an odd-shaped head.
That's gross, but...
Noggin rickets, what a word.
Well, surely that's what it is. Anyway, all right, so I'm seeing some very simple solutions here brought to us courtesy of traditional societies. How do we translate those for people living around here? What should people do?
First thing, if you start off your life with your baby intending to breastfeed, and there are many things that can get in the way, and I am certainly not one to judge because I've had many of those problems, but always go in with the intention of breastfeeding and find as many people as you can to help support you on that journey, because breastfeeding is such an effective way to enable the sleep protection, the sleep interactions, the changes in position, the muscle strengthening, all of these things. That's a big one, feeding. Second, we should think about how much time we have baby heads in the same position on a surface. So in most of the world, pushchairs, strollers, prams, car seats, they're not nearly as big a thing as they are in the West, because we can use them. You can get systems where you almost never need to take your baby out of something that is pushing on their skull. But if we can move towards more carrying in slings or in-arm carrying, use car seats only in the car, take the babies out, give them time outside and on different surfaces so they are not always kind of being hammered on the back of the head. That's a really big one.
And I assume the flip side of that, of course, is give them the ability to choose how they're resting their head by giving them the strength to move their head.
Exactly, yes.
How do you train that?
The strength to move the head?
Yeah.
Couple of things. So we mentioned slings and in-arm carrying. So anything where you're basically putting the baby's head on top of the neck, it takes some of the weight of the head and allows the baby to move.
But it will fall off.
Not.
No, I know this from years of being taught about babies from the NHS. If you hold a baby upright, its head falls clean off. I've seen it in educational posters.
The way you do it, Greg, is when they're really small, you can put a finger up on each side of the head. You've got a little bit, you can allow them to have movement without the head completely falling off, because no one does want that, let's face it.
Nobody wants that. But okay, so you're talking about when they're very, very young, holding the head, helping them hold the head up with a finger on each side.
Exactly, yeah.
And how do you know when to stop?
Once the baby is being able to move their head on their own, you need to just support it less and less.
You're talking about physical training and growth and learning and strengthening.
It is physical training. So important.
You can't physically train a baby that's anti-cultural.
Early neck strength enables a baby to interact with its world better, enables it to not have a odd-shaped head through life.
Yep.
But the one other thing I want to say, which is not what you potentially, unless you've read my article, will think about, but if you can hold a baby outside a nappy when it needs to wee and poo in a squat position, you'll find it gets head and neck controlled so much more quickly, and because you have to hold them out quite frequently, it means that you've got such a good driver to get them to change position.
Because you're uncomfortable.
Because you're uncomfortable.
I like that.
Yeah. You see, you know what they're doing, and so you try and fix it. And that's just such a kind of built-in reminder for you to move a baby.
I like that. Completely unrelated bodily systems, but bladder stress leading to neck strength is a lovely little piece of primatology. The veterinarian in me approves.
Thank you. Good.
Okay, we've talked about what is going on with flattened heads, brachycephaly, plagiocephaly, and the differences. Why this is just a Western problem. What happens in other cultures. How we can bring some of that back to these knighted shores. Excuse me. And how we can fit that to modern society. Love it. Anything else to add?
Yes, I do. A little while ago, a listener asked us to have a bit on what happens if you've missed the boat.
Yes.
So, what happens if you have a child that you've read this article and you go, oh no, my child does have an odd-shaped head. I've been looking at it for a while and thinking, is that dent supposed to be there? Well, what I would say is the kind of risks of changes in how the head is growing, they're not huge, so they should be a reason for you to just put in a little bit more effort than you would if they didn't have it on, for example, jaw development. Make sure your child is chewing plenty of tough stuff to help their jaws to grow properly.
Good examples of tough stuff?
Yeah, raw sweet potato is such a good one. Raw sweet potato, carrot, tough meat,
overbaked
tough bread. Yeah, lots and lots of options there. In terms of eyesight, just make sure that your child spends more time outside. Help their eyes to have the best chance of growing normally.
And so, this is a list of things that are even more important.
Yeah.
And they're already important for most kids, but
Yeah.
these are even more important for kids with a dent.
Yeah,
Got
exactly.
it. Got
yeah. You can do a lot at any point in a child's life to try and reduce the consequences of something that's happened earlier.
Beautiful. Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. I enjoyed the article. I especially enjoyed the nonsense bits that I put in about ancient cultures that did this to kids on purpose. Enjoy that, my dear reader, because that was the only thing I contributed to the article.
Rubbish.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We've got time for a listener question. Gwen, we have one sent in which is directed to you in person. In fact, I think they all have been so far. I'm not that sad. There has been some media hype about extended breastfeeding this week. What has been going on, Gwen, and what would you like people to know?
Great. First, I'm going to just pick up on the term extended breastfeeding here, because this is, again, a very weird cultural term. So extended breastfeeding is, I think, a term that we use in our culture to describe breastfeeding past the point when babies start to eat solid food. But that's a misnomer in itself. Yeah. Because actually, babies and toddlers have evolved to breastfeed for much, much longer than that. It's just in our culture, we kind of go, breast milk's only before they start to eat, right? So then you don't need it after that. So the media hype was that fashion designer Karen Millen said in an interview that it was selfish of mothers to breastfeed babies beyond 6 months, and that it made babies addicted to breasts.
Oh!
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
Such a fashion designer thing to say. Sorry.
I mean, we all know what the function of breasts are, Greg. They're to look incredible in your clothes.
I'm thinking of one very specific fashion designer who would definitely have said something like that.
Wow.
Go on.
You can imagine that lots of people got very upset about this, because in general, our culture makes it really hard to breastfeed. And when people say statements like this, it really misleads people about what babies need.
Sure.
And so my feeling is that, this fashion designer is, I think, 70 or so, very much a child of her time. We knew much less about the functions of breastfeeding at that point, right?
Sorry, just cracking up about this idea that we've gone through such a trough of knowledge about how the body works. Yeah. We used to know all of this stuff. This was all absolutely ingrained. But 70 years ago to now, apparently we've got better. And we're still at a situation where we have no bloody clue. No. We used to know as a culture, and now we don't.
No.
But apparently 70 years ago it was worse.
Yeah, well, certainly for breastfeeding.
Fair enough.
Woo,
carry on.
We're getting better.
The little wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make sure that I'm really clear on this, so the NHS says kind of rather wishy-washily that extended breastfeeding is really good. No, sorry. Exclusive breastfeeding is really good up until the age of 6 months, and there are benefits beyond that. The World Health Organization, much more straightforward.
Yeah, they don't mince words.
It says that babies should be fed up until the age of 2 years, and if you breastfeed for longer, there are additional benefits to your baby. And what are these benefits? Obviously, again, we have a very big cultural focus on nutrition. So yes, breast milk provides nutrition. And that is just one of the many amazing things it does. We've talked, in this podcast about the mechanical loads that it places on the skull, how it changes how a baby sleeps. We've talked in previous podcasts about pain relief, about protection against ear infections and hearing loss, about jaw development and crooked teeth, about immune regulation and allergies. I could keep going, Greg, but let's just be really, really, really clear and say that if you are breastfeeding, do whatever you can to breastfeed your baby until the age of 2 years. And I know it's really hard, and there may well be things that stop you, but if you start off with that intention, that breastfeeding for 2 years is the minimum, then we can start to get all of those benefits into our children and set them up for far, far better long-term health.
May I chuck in my most important thing to say about breastfeeding?
Yeah.
Obviously, without breast myself, I don't get much of a say here. But if you cannot make enough milk to give your child all of the calories they require, switching to formula is absolutely the nuclear option. Topping up with formula, on the other hand, is kind of the best of both worlds, right? You get all the immunological, the comfort, the strength training, all of that benefit from the breast milk, and then you get the calories you need from Tesco's Finest or wherever people are buying powdered milk nowadays. Like, you don't have to swap. You can do both. That was kind of revolutionary to me. I'd never really thought about it until that ended up being what we did.
Not easy though, was it?
No, really
You had to
hard.
work really hard at the beginning, and then once it was established, I was like, I'm so glad, even if I can only produce 25 to 30% of the milk my baby needs, I'm so glad I breastfeed, because I get all of these other benefits that I hadn't appreciated at the beginning, when I was just like, my baby is losing weight and I cannot get it back on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, an emotional one today. What a roller coaster. I think we're done.
Yeah, I
that
think
was
we're
fun.
done too, yeah.
The article's already out. The podcast will be in a few days. Do we know the topic for the article next week?
It's going to be on snacking. Should children snack, Greg?
I'm not going to answer that because I'll get it wrong. But I look forward to reading the article and offering my halfpenny worth. Is that a thing nowadays? Threepenny bits? What are we using?
I mean, 70 years ago, it's a different time, Greg.
Thanks very much for listening to the Growing Up Weird podcast with me, Dr. Greg Dickens.
And me, Dr. Gwen Bradbury.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.